Welcome to our next FOH member deep dive. And today we have Kenny Gargett, forum mod, much loved and hated on FOH.
Haven't I got rid of all those people that hate me yet?
Most of them.
The best thing about being a moderator is you can actually post in other people's names. So you just post something and they get kicked off.
That's why you got kicked off. How many times have you been kicked off, Ken?
Not for quite a while. And in fairness, that was only because I had you saying things, and for the first time you went back and actually read what you'd said. I'd got away with it for about 3 years.
5 times, people. I used to love those days. I had to give Ken a call. I'd get a call. I'd get a call from Ken saying, "I'm not sure if you've seen." I'd be fishing somewhere on a Saturday morning, then I'd get a call.
Oh yeah, I'd wait. You'd be getting on a plane.
Yeah, and he'd say, "Look, I don't know if you've read the forum, but there may be an issue." And every time he says that, I know that you are at the heart of that issue.
Responding only, ever responding.
You don't. You always
standing
have
up.
You have to have the last goddamn word on
Apparently
everything.
not.
No, that's me. I have the last word on everything. But yeah, Jesus. Look, you have been good. You've been good ever since after your last suspension, which was 6 months, if I remember correctly. That was the longest suspension we've ever given, is 6 months.
Was that a 6-month one? Oh, well, you've kicked people off completely, deservedly so, mostly.
Anyway, where does this deep dive find you, Ken?
Needing a refill. Can you come around? You mean, well, I'm Brisbane, Queensland, born and bred in Queensland. Did live away for quite a long time and back.
You spent a bit of time in the States. Well, actually, no, you spent before the States. You were in the UK, weren't you?
School here, very traditional, conservative family, all the rest of it. Law degree, worked in a firm here. Wanted to do the usual overseas travel thing that everyone, or most people do, for a year or so, or 6 months. And I sat down one day and did the sums. I thought if I was really lucky, I might get to Singapore when they'd deport me back home. That was about as far as I was going to go. I wasn't going anywhere for a year. And someone came up with the idea, well, why don't you go over and study in London? And I just thought, listen, I've did an arts degree, law degree. I'd had a gutful. I did not want to do any more studying. But then I worked it out. I mean, the old man thought it was a great idea, and he was happy to fund it. That was the only way I was getting overseas, was to go and study. So I went and did a master's in London.
How old were you then?
It's a year, and to be honest, and then I worked in London for another year at a firm called Richards Butler.
Sorry, the question was, how old were you at that stage?
Oh, sorry, I thought you said how long was I there? Oh, mid-20s.
Mid-20s, yeah.
Yeah, something around then. Yeah, mid-20s. So
you got a master's of law degree?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ! I thought you did it online. I had no idea.
No, I got a master's of King's College London, and then I worked in various very serious, very large law firms for a number of years. Back when,
I mean, what's the longest you've ever kept the job in the law firm?
Well, I did a lot of. I mean, I did my articles in Brisbane, and then I think another 2 years before I went to London. The job I got in London after the masters was for 2 years, but they were a strange firm, and there was nothing wrong with it. It was good, but I was in the shipping and aviation finance department, which meant that you would work your bum off for 2-3 weeks, and then have 3 or 4 weeks where literally there was not a thing to do. I used to bring novels in. I would beg them for work because I was there to try and learn. You'd go in and see the boss, and he'd be sound asleep in his office, sound asleep. But he'd worked out, it was very good because he'd worked out a pose, and you'd come in And sometimes you'd talk to him for 5 minutes before you'd realise he was actually snoring. And he never got in before 11 o'clock in the morning. And I just thought, this is driving me insane. And so I went and saw them, and we sort of had this chat, and they said, yeah, well, we just don't have the work, and we were going to talk to you, and you've come and talked to us. So, and at that stage, I'd worked out, actually, a friend and I were looking at going down through, I wanted to do the trip through Africa. I wanted to go and see the gorillas. That was one of the things I wanted to do. Unfortunately, she ended up taking her own life, which was really quite tragic. She was a girlfriend of a good mate of mine, and she was coming back, and we were just going to both get on this trip. And you know, you can get on these trucks where there's about 15, 20 people, and it goes wherever. And there's a lot of, they don't do them, I don't think, quite so much these days, because it's a bit more dangerous. But back then, there were a lot of them going. So I did a lot of research, worked out where to go, and found this one. It was basically a 7+ month trip. Left London, drove down to Nairobi, right up through the Middle East, through India up to Kathmandu, and that was 7 months. And then I spent another, I think I spent nearly a month in Kathmandu, couple of months down in Thailand, a month on an island, which was great. It's $2 a day, and you know.
So you did that. You came back to Oz straight away. Or did you go to the US straight
No,
away?
while I was travelling, the old man had said, you know, what are you doing in that? And I said to him, I said, look, I'm thinking about applying to go and see if I can work for a year or so in the States. And I just was an off the cuff comment, and I hadn't really written. I wasn't that serious or anything like that. I had made some applications when I was in London a year or two earlier, but they had no idea what to do in those days. They had no idea what to do with an Australian who'd studied in London. They just thought, what the hell? And so I didn't get anywhere, and that didn't bother me. Anyway, and then in those days, you remember there was no, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have computers, laptops, anything like this. If you wanted to talk to home, you had to ring. And Africa in those days,
You would have been in your element. No mobile
I loved it.
phones. No.
No one knew what hemisphere I was in. Literally, no one knew what hemisphere I was in, let alone where.
We rarely know what planet you're on.
And this time it was justified. But in Africa, you couldn't ring reverse charge. All the countries banned it, because if you ring reverse charge, they don't get the money. So they made it. And of course, ringing in those days from Africa was about $1 squillion a minute. I'm on the back of a truck, bones of my ass type stuff. You just didn't. You wrote letters, and you would check the what do they call it? Post restant, I think, to see whether anything had arrived while you were there, because people would write to post offices, and you'd come and collect them. And if you missed, well, the thing probably still sitting there. And so that's the only way you kept in touch.
So some law firm in the United States wrote a letter saying, "Come and join us."
No. One of Dad's partners was good friends with a lawyer in DC, and this guy worked for a small building law firm of 3 men on the outskirts in Virginia, on the outskirts of DC. Now, I'd never done a skerrick of building law in my life, but I knew this partner I'd known all Dad's partners since I was this big. And this guy called Brian Ernst, who was one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Very, very sharp. Passed away incredibly. I mean, Jesus, it's a scary world. He passed away very young. He was a very fit guy. But he was talking to Dad, and he said, what was I up to? Because, I'd known them all, our friends. And Dad said, he's got this mad idea that after he finally comes back from wherever he is, he's going to go across to the States. And so Brian just said, well, does he want a connection with him? I'll ring my mate. So he rings this guy, there was something in this, because this guy actually lived on the outskirts of DC, on a street called Easy Street, when I went there, I lived in Vacation Lane. You just seriously, it was just perfect. Anyway, so the guy says, "Yeah, sure, send him over. He can come over and work for us." Anyway, and I knew none of this because I'm in the middle of jungle somewhere. And then when I finally got to India, I rang Dad, and because that was the first time I could actually get through. And so I rang and we had a chat, and he said, "Oh, have you sorted out this thing in the States?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh, it's all been organised. You've got to ring so and so. They're going to. Yeah, you can go over and work." And I said, "There's not much point in me going to the States to work in a 3-man building law firm because I'm never going to do building law. I don't know. It might be a fun experience, but it's probably pretty pointless." But he said, "Well, when you get home," which was still a few months away, you can ring them then. They're no hurry. So when I eventually did get home, months later, and I did get to see the gorillas, by the way. But anyway, I get and I ring up, and there's sort of confusion, and I'm put through to another bloke, really nice guy. He looked a bit like Thomas Magnum.
Is there
Magnum
any
PI.
chance to get into the end of the story? Or can we
I thought the idea was for me, I was supposed to sit here and talk.
Well, we've only got an hour and a bit. We don't have 6 days.
I'm not going to tell you anything useful. I'm just going to, anyway, almost. But so I rang this firm, and in the meantime, the 3-man building firm had been swallowed up by one of Washington's biggest law firms, which happened to be a banking law firm, mostly in those days. And in those days, they had clients like Fannie Mae amongst something like 100 foreign banks and so on. This is the days before Fannie Mae went off the rails. And so it was actually quite perfect. And they said, "Do you want to come over?" And I said, "I'd love to." And they said, "Great." And then they said, "Are you coming for a couple of days or a week? Well, how long do you want to come?" And I said, "Well, it's not much point coming for less than a year. No problem." And I said, "Do we have to pay you?" And I said, "Well, if you don't, I can't really live. Not a problem." They were brilliant. They were a fabulous firm. They were that's probably the firm I've most enjoyed working with. Definitely the firm I've most enjoyed working with was in DC. They were great. I really had a ball there. So I went over.
I know that's where you got the love of the Redskins, no doubt. In
that is
DC.
indeed. I arrived at the airport. I was staying with this friend had written, and it arrived the day I was leaving. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done. Anyway, and she'd said, "Come and stay at my place." As it turned out, her parents, they perhaps would be in the wealthier part of the demographic around Washington. Anyway, so I stayed with, and she was only there that one day, picked me up from the airport, said, "Come on, we'll throw the gear at Mum and Dad's." So I'm in a car full of people that I never met. We throw my luggage into her place. We hardly slowed down in the driveway. And we go straight into Georgetown, where we watch the Redskins beat, I think it was the Chargers or something like that. I forget exactly, Saint someone. And because that was back in the days when they were great. And I'd always enjoyed the game. I really loved the old 85 Bears, but I didn't have a team that I was sort of locked into. But one day in DC, and I've been ever since.
Did you get to do a lot of games?
I went to one game, had to scalp tickets, because in those days they were booked out 10 years in advance. I mean, they were sold out for 10 years.
That's true.
So had to scalp tickets. It was a year, I think we lost 2 or 3 games. Dallas won 1. And of course, I go to the one where Dallas beat us. And I thought, well, isn't that, but it was still great fun. Coldest day in the world. I remember beautiful blue skies, -5 or something. I had 3 pairs of socks on with huge boots, and I could still feel the cold coming up my bones. But I had a hoot. I mean, I sat there with these people and chatted to whoever was sitting there.
I was going to ask your first cigar, your journey into cigars. When did that start?
Look, I've never had a cigarette. Never had a cigarette in my life, and no desire. The old man smoked cigarettes fairly heavily, and he made it fairly clear that if he ever caught me with one, I wouldn't be sitting down for about a month. And the old man I mean, the bark was worse than the bite, but the bark was pretty fearsome. Anyway, so, and I just had never had the interest in a cigarette. But I can remember, would have been late 70s, early 80s when I was at uni and young lawyer. Occasionally you'd go somewhere, people would have a cigar, and I tried a few of those, and they didn't put me off, but they didn't sort of flick switches. And I'm sure they would have been something like Henry Winterman's. None of us had a clue what a good cigar was or anything like that, and we didn't sort of explore them at all. We were certainly really getting into wine and trying to learn a lot about wine and things like lots of other things, but cigars never really on the radar. In London, I can remember once or twice we had cigars and that was fine. They seemed fair enough. I took one with me on this trip through Africa, and I can remember I had it in a plastic bag or something in the backpack for 7 or 8 months before I actually smoked the thing. So you can imagine what it was like after 7 or 8 months in a backpack throughout Africa, probably not in peak condition, but that was fine. And I'd have one every now and again. And then it was Gary Farr from Bannockburn, the winemaker. He came up to Fraser with us one year, and he went to your place and picked up a whole lot of cigars. And he sat in the balcony and smoked them all. And we sort of watched him, and he wasn't giving any up. But he's a great man, Gary, but we weren't getting near his cigars. He was quite happy to open wines for us, but the cigars were off limits. And I thought, where the hell? And he said, it's in the coffee plant. Well, there's nothing in that. Anyway, so, and I remember the first time I was in there, and I came in with a friend of mine, and you were much more interested in talking to her than you were to me.
Things haven't changed.
No, things haven't changed at all, except now I don't have any friends to bring. Anyway, and you sold me, I remember you sold me, I think, a couple of, they might have been, might have been right around the time of the very first limited editions in the little coffins, the A-sized.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, and I've looked at this later and I thought, he's dudded me, this bloke. He has dudded me. He sold this to me for 3 times the price it should be. I'm completely convinced you dudded me. And for some reason, I still came back. God knows why. Anyway, so, when I was in Brazil, I'd quite often drop in and then you started having those dinners and things like that, and it all sort of took off from that.
Oh, well, there you go. I've changed your life. Excellent.
Yeah, to a degree.
To a degree. Where'd you get into wine? I mean, you left law to go into wine.
Well, sort of. It was a almost osmosis type thing. I grew up in a family that didn't drink really. I mean, Mum hates the stuff, but is also a little bit religious, not fanatical or anything like that. Dad, he wasn't religious at all, but he just didn't enjoy it. He said, I'll have a half a beer at a wedding, but that's all. I don't really. And when he'd go fishing with his mates, they'd have a rum and milk. But that's all he had no interest in it. My grandfather had a big collection of old whiskies and things and cigars. I'd love to know where they all went. Probably in the bin. Which breaks my heart, but anyway. So at uni, you're there with your mates, you go to parties, you're students, you've got absolutely not a brass razoo. So we went through the phase of taking beers to parties and then taking, I think a bottle of Bundy in those days was $8 or $10. And
that's Bundaberg rum, people. That's Bundaberg rum, the worst rum in the world, in its base form. You could run your car on it.
Perhaps a little harsh, but
Bundaberg rum you had to mix. There's no way you could drink that neat.
A lot of people do.
No.
It is more of a mixing rum than a sipping rum. But in those, we didn't know anything. We just did not know anything else about any other rum. Beanley put out a rum for a while, but that was sort of like Powers Beer putting out a beer to challenge Forex. I mean, Bundy still is massive percentage of the Australian rum market and spirits market.
It is.
It's extraordinary, really, incredibly successful. And I tell you what, people hear you say that, and it'll be fisticuffs. I mean, there are people who line up outside the factory to get stuff when they're having a release.
Trust me, people who drink Bundaberg rum don't actually watch this. I think I'm pretty safe.
Don't bet on that. Don't bet on that. Anyway,
I don't mind a rumbo. I don't mind a rumbo, a Bundaberg rum and Diet Coke. I can live with. That's fine. Doesn't worry me. But I cannot drink Bundy Red straight. Impossible. It's impossible. It is. You've never tried. That's all. Anyway, get back to wine.
Well, anyway, so we kept doing, looking for the cheapest, and we discovered things like blackberry nip, and then we had, I think it was, passion fruit pop or something like that, which was $1 a bottle or some crap. And then we found port, and honestly, this stuff would kill the proverbial brown dog. We had a competition, and the thing was to find the cheapest bottle of port you could find anywhere. Not necessarily a highbrow competition, but we were uni students, and I think someone had one for $1.80 out of the Regatta or something one day. And then I was driving through the Hunt, because in those days you used to drive back and forth. If you're going to see friends in Sydney, you drove because it was so much cheaper than flying. And so I'm driving back, and I see an ad for McWilliams port, so I pull in, and I can remember buying a couple of bottles for 39 cents. Still remember that, 39 cents for a bottle of port. Anyway, a year or so later, the old man used to do a lot of fishing. He would go up the reef with his mates once, twice a year, and they had a thing whereas if you couldn't make it, you went back down to the bottom of the waiting list, and the person at the top went in, unless you had someone to slot in. So he couldn't make it one year because he had meetings or whatever, and he said to me, right, get your law books, and you're taking them with you, and you're going up to the reef so I don't lose my spot. And I thought, how good is this? You can imagine the amount of studying that got done. So I went up with his mates to the reef for a week. Had a brilliant week. But I do remember about 2/3 of the way through, the captain came out and he said, now, who'd like a glass of port? And I actually told this story at the Yalumba 175th recently. And I can remember thinking, why would you serve that in a nice situation like this? Why would you serve anyone port unless you wanted to, if you like them? Because it's the most vile, revolting muck on the planet. Then I thought, you see these stories about the gentlemen in London with their cigars and leather chairs and a glass of port. Maybe there's something in this. And I'm sure it was only something like a Yalumba Galway pipe. And he tried, and I just thought, wow, how, the difference between what we were drinking at parties and what this thing was, even though there were still many levels higher, it just blew me away. And so I just thought, I've got to learn about this. I went back and tried to learn as much as I could about port, and how you get obsessive when you're that age about things. And so I really tried to learn it and bought some more and so forth. And I can remember one of my mates one day saying, well, every time we come around, all you've got to drink is ports. What about wine? I said, I don't know anything about wine. Too hard to learn. And he said, think about it. So I started to look at some of the magazines about wine and stuff, and then I got obsessed with that as well. And then and then I thought, well, I'll make sure it's just Australian wine because there's too much to learn about overseas wine. You can never do that. And it just explodes. And that's where it came from.
Then you started buying wine in London, didn't you? If I remember correctly, for others at auction. Was that?
I did that. A couple of mates would buy and sell in London at the time. I remember that in those days the auction list had to either be faxed or posted. There was no internet bidding or any of this. And because I was there, they had been submitting bids, but of course, if you submit a bid, no one's there. If someone tops you, you can't go up and down. And so they let me bid on their behalf, which was great fun, going down to Christie's, in a suit, and there'd always be a tasting of old, beautiful wines before it, and you'd be in there. Michael Broadbent would be up there with his little hammer, etc. And it was a great place to take girls because they used to think you were the coolest person in the world going down to bid in Christie's.
You had a paddle? Did you have a paddle?
Yeah. They'd give you'd register yourself and up you'd go. And so I'm
just out of interest. So, I mean, what were you buying? You buying French Reds, or what were you buying back then?
look,
What were you buying them for?
Well, mostly for the mates back here, and they'd send me over a
So
list of
what were you buying them for, price wise? I mean, what were they going for? I mean, do a compare.
Well, two I can remember. There was one of my mates had said, "You know what I like," because quite often at these auctions in those days, stuff would be added at the end that wouldn't be on the list, and if you weren't there personally to see it, you couldn't bid. He said, "If anything comes up, you know I like, you've got my authority to bid for it." And I rang him up, and I'd got most of the stuff he'd wanted this day, which was quite a fair bit. And he said, and I said, "Oh, look, by the way, Sean, I've also a couple of lots came up late, and I got them for you." And he said, "Oh, great. No, that'll be great. You know what I like. I'm sure it'll be great." I said, "They're a bit expensive." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, a dozen wines, and they were $400 each." Now, this is mid to late 80s, sort of around about, would have been about 87, I guess, 86, 87, something like that. And he just went, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm not interested. You'll have to tell him I'm not interested." I said, "Well, I've bid for them. I mean," and I'm thinking, this is great, isn't it? I don't have the money. And he said, "Out of interest, what were they?" And I said, "Oh, there's 6 bottles of 1969 DRC and 6 bottles of 1959 DRC. Now, today they'd be, 50,000 each." There was just this silence at the end of the phone. He said, "Did you say $400 each?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh, all right then." And fortunately, I got to drink quite a few of them when I got back, which was rather neat. But yeah, I mean, the 59 DRC Romani Conti today would be, probably well over 100,000. I would, as a guess. Who knows? Who knows?
What was your first paying gig in the wine world? Because now you're a wine judge, you're a wine writer. What was your first paying gig?
Well, basically, when I first started vaguely seriously, was a mate and his girlfriend were heading down to the coast one day, and she was basically hanging around waiting for him to propose. And in the meantime, because the family had plenty of money, she was dabbling in journalism. And if she ever hears me describe it like that, I'm a dead man, because she thought of it as a very serious career. And she published the little, the Brisbane News that gets thrown on the doorstep in front of all the high rise. You pick it up and read it, just the local news once a week. And she published that thing. And she said, "Do you want to do a wine con?" Because she knew I had an interest. And I said, "Yeah, sure." Anyway, I heard nothing more about it and didn't really think much about it. And I didn't think she was serious. And she rang me up about 3 weeks later and she said, "Are you ever going to do one?" I said, "Well, are you serious?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay. Well, when do you need it by?" She said, "Well, we go to print in an hour and I've got a space." So I'm down there, supposed to be running the Gold Coast branch of a law firm. I shut the door and I said to my secretary, "If the boss from Brisbane rings, I'm out, or I've got clients or something." So I sat down for an hour and I hand wrote out something. I'm sure it was only about 150 words, but seemed like writing War and Peace. And I put it on the fax and sent it up to her. And I rang up and I said, "How's that?" And she goes, "Yeah, well, it fits the space." That was my first review. It fits the space. I just felt like, that's it. It fits the space. There's no Pulitzer Prize coming for this, is there? It's just, it fits the space. She said, "Do another one for 2 weeks." Well, as I say, it's probably 150, 200 words. I reckon I would have spent 3/4 of the next 2 weeks desperately rewriting something.
There was no money in this, was there? There was no money in this.
Well, at the time, I was interested in, there was a champagne competition, which is now sort of, after COVID, it sort of died, and also for a few other reasons, basically because quite a few people were largely insane and all thought and it turned into just a political nasty thing. But it ran for 30 or 40 years. Evans was one of the first winners, and they had an amateur and a professional section. And the prize was 2 weeks in Champagne, the sort of thing that money could never buy. And I was interested in doing this. But I knew it'd take me several years entering. People didn't win it their first year. They, had to show they were serious, keep entering, that sort of thing. But I knew if I took money, I'd then have to go into the professional. So I said to my friend, I said, I'll write this column for you on the proviso that you do not pay me a cent. Said, okay. Anyway, so for the couple of years until I actually did win this thing, I just did it for free, for fun. And once I'd won it, I said, well, you can pay me. I think I then was elevated to something like $60 a week for the column or something, massive. But winning that thing then gave me credibility. And not so long after that, the woman behind the Courier Mail at the time asked if I'd come over and write for them. Which, like, at the time, David Bray, who was a good mate of mine, and I used to see him regularly at the rugby, and I'd said, listen, David's at that stage had been writing a wine column longer than anyone else in the world, apparently. And I said, I'm not coming in if this means kicking David out, because he's a mate of mine and Brisbane's too small. And she said, no, he's finishing up. I said, okay, in that case, I'm happy. Unfortunately, David didn't know he was finishing up and he wasn't keen to finish up. And I just said, I'm out of it. And she said, I'll come back to you in a year. And she did. And then there was, unfortunately, several people in the paper all went and asked different people to write the column. And that all got very confusing. But eventually they said, right, it's yours. And I always worked on the basis that I have it for a week and then another week. And I ended up 15 years or something like that. But it then also allowed me to do all sorts of other stuff. And eventually
you write for magazines. You now travel the world as a wine writer. You're a judge. You've done all that.
Travel that much, yeah.
Oh, you've just come back. You've come back from Italy. You've done 2 weeks over there, fully paid. You did Helsinki. You've come back. You've tasted some of the great wines in the world. What are the parallels that you see between wine and cigars? Are there any parallels?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as I've said to Hamlet, I've said if next time he's in France, he's got to let me know, because I will arrange for him to go and talk to some of the chef de caves in the champagne houses, because particularly champagne and cigars, that blending, it's just so aligned, what they think and what they do. And I mean, I listen to a chef de cave and it's almost, except for the profanities and idiocy, it's like listening to Hamlet, and sort of vice versa. It's just they think alike in that blending sort of thing. Also, I mean, normal wines as well, of course, but not quite to the same extent as that blending that goes on in champagne. And then there's the concept of aging things, the different terroirs, particularly in wine, perhaps more than cigars, although obviously Pinot del Rio in Cuba and places, you do get different, better leaves.
You do. Unfortunately, they all throw them into the same pot largely, and I think that's an aspect where Cuba can certainly gravitate towards, is having proper terroir cigars, and say from these fincas and these areas here, and actually do it properly and have some credibility in doing it.
I think that was, someone had that thought when they started Alejandro Rabena. I'm sure that was part of what they were thinking. Here's an estate. We can start this concept, almost like single vineyard wines. We've got estate cigars and things. And 20 odd years ago, talking to Hamlet, and his access to leaves was well above tossing them all in together and just, here's what you're getting. The way he talked at the time was he did have some sort of access to the leaves he wanted.
He'd have a direct line to Tabacuba, to the guy in Tabacuba who used to apportion the leaves out or to the different stores for the gun rollers, for the display rollers. And yeah, he had a nice little in with him, and he'd get exactly what he wanted every goddamn time, which was fantastic.
Yep. And that's like, I mean, you go to Penfolds or somewhere, and the fight between winemakers trying to get hold of the grapes from different vineyards for their particular, because there's a lot of winemakers at a place like Penfolds and they make a lot of different wines. They all want, they want the best grapes they can get hold of. It's that same sort of thing. Small little, one-man operations or family operations are slightly different, but they're single vineyards. Quite often they've got what they can. And you can almost sort of see, the grower cigars, if you like. Fred Nurk has got his own little patch of a hectare on the corner of somewhere, and he grows his own plants, and then he rolls. You can see that coming in down the track, but they've somehow got to get past the concept of these aren't just the stuff you buy on the street.
They got to get past the concept of communism, and they got to start paying people properly, and they need to incentivize people, and they need some profit sharing that goes through that process. I mean, the guys, the marketing division made $750 million last year, and yet the farmer hasn't been paid for 6 months or 7 months, and gets a gun put to his head, not literally, but told that if you're not planting this much, well, then we're going to take your farm off you. Which is all fine and dandy, except that he's still waiting on the fuel that was promised. He's still waiting on the fertilizer that was promised. He's still waiting on whatever pesticide they're going to use if anything comes through at all. So it's just a fundamental breakdown of the system that they have. Well, that in the end,
I mean, if you take it that it improves slightly, and you've got the farmer who has his hectare and knows that he can grow so much, and he gets paid for that, and they don't care what it is, what quality or anything like that. Whereas he knows that if he puts in a lot more effort and spends some money, he can provide them with a much better quality of leaf. Why is he going to do that if in the long run it means a lot more hard work and less money? And so they've got to incentivize.
So basically he gets shafted on the crop because they say quality is not up to it. So instead of paying $2 a pound, we're going to pay X dollars a pound, 50% less. And we're going to pay you 6 months later. In the meantime, the guy's gone and planted a cigarette crop or cigarette tobacco crop after this crop, which only just diminishes the soil, the soil. And he's back.
But it feeds his family.
Pay him properly. Make sure that he's recognised within the group, within the farming group, within the Tabacuba network. People respond to respect, and there's just a complete lack of respect that goes on right now.
And
you have your guns, So, for the last 15 years, it's been Hector Luis Prieto. It's all great, but he's in the States at the moment. Most of the time before that, it was Don Alejandro Rubena. Of course, the old man passed away, and Hiroshi is now in the States. His grandson in the States running things. There's just a disconnect between business, the way it should be run, and what's actually happening, where you get your raw materials from, which is the most important part of it, or such an essential part of it.
If you tell whoever it is that has his, Gomez Adams, who's got his hectare of that he grows, and you say, okay, standard price is X. If your quality is such and such, and you can measure that by the fact that those leaves are used in Monte Cristo 2s or Cohiba Siglo 6 or something like that. That's how you can see that he's reaching that quality, because they're used in those cigars. You get paid extra, sir, if your quality is that good. Who's not? I mean, they fall over them. Grape growers fall over themselves to be able to provide grapes that go into Grange. Things like that. They get paid. They provide a lot less grapes rather than just the big bulk stuff. They make sure the quality is so high that they can get into that, and they get paid accordingly. And they're so proud of being. I've been to some of the what they call the Grange lunch, where they have all the growers who made grapes, or who grew grapes that went into Grange that year, and they are so proud to be there, and they're so proud that we've been in there for 12 years in a row now. And someone else, oh, we missed 2 years because of this, but we're back, and they're so proud of it. And there's no reason why that can't.
No, I'd
Particularly,
love to say. But it will take a whole shake-up of the system and a completely different system, which I think, look, it's worked in Vietnam in different industries. It certainly works in other communist countries or socialist countries where excellence is rewarded. And I think excellence needs to be rewarded certainly in the Cuban sphere. But back to wines, and because our guys have I mean, our community on FOH has a tremendous love of wine and tremendous love of spirits, as you know. In terms of wine, what do you? I mean, being a wine writer, a wine judge, it's very difficult. I assume you get to taste everything. I've been to your house plenty of times. It's chock full, guys. It's chock full. There's cartons of wines everywhere that just get delivered to him on a daily, if not weekly basis, multiple for you to taste. But when you are, in the rare occasions, I suspect that you can choose a bottle of wine for you and a good mate. What do you is there something you gravitate towards? Do you have a certain taste that you just love, that just you? Now we talk about it in terms of cigars. When your hand goes in your humidor and you've got different cigars, your hand generally gravitates to a couple of things. What in wine in your cellar? What does your hand generally gravitate when you have that time where you're not working, where it's just you?
At home, I mean, today nothing's been delivered today. I haven't checked outside for a few hours, but so far nothing's been delivered today. Now that's the first day that I can think of in a long time where something hasn't turned up. They turn up in far. I've got a bench in there with 4 dozen lined up that I've got to taste it tomorrow or the weekend. They just come through the thing. So there's always something there. And the stuff I do for Quill and Pad, I mean, a lot of that is for Wine Pilot, which ranges from cheapies to the good stuff. Quill and Pad, if I'm doing that, that incorporates cigars, spirits, champagnes, wines. They tend to be a much higher quality. And so I'll often keep one of those aside to enjoy after that evening or whatever. But I can't remember the last time I actually went to the cellar or to a cupboard to open something to sit down and drink at home, because there's always something that's open. There's always stuff there. It just sort of feels like it'd be a waste. But when I catch up with whoever, it depends what sort of thing is happening, or if people come around and we open it. I mean, when you used to come around on the old deck, they were some of the ones that were delivered, but also that also occasionally gave me a chance to open something I'd wanted to drink, which was great. So it depends who you're drinking it with, where you're drinking it. For example, there's a doctor's lunch once every 6 weeks or so. It was Bordeaux blends on Saturday. So I had a fantastic Italian Merlot. It was one of the ones we sourced in Italy on the trip at the end of last year. It's fantastic because it's a 2008. They made 400 bottles. They never made any other vintage. It was just done as a tribute to the owner of the estate. And they still had these ones. So we actually said, well, we'll take them back for Brizzy. And so I opened that, for example. I've got to catch up with a friend who is a champagne fanatic tomorrow, the next day, whenever. So I've got a bottle of one of my favourite champagnes out for that. So
the way I was going to ask a question, the way you write your reviews in wine is very similar to the way you write your reviews in cigars when you actually do a proper cigar review. Well, I know you've got a fantastic palate, and I don't commend you very often in many things, like rarely, but you do have a fantastic palate.
Is this still is recording? It is.
Yes,
God, yes.
Still recording. But why did I say that? But a lot of our guys,
You know that I'm going to turn that into my. Whenever you ring now, that's what's going to come across as the ringtone.
Shut the fuck up. A lot of our guys have got excellent palates as well, but a lot of them
Absolutely.
a lot of them absolutely struggle in teasing flavors from cigars. In your opinion, is a palate something you are I mean, obviously you're naturally born with the palate you have, and every palate is different. But is a palate something that you believe you can train?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And look, people are born. They talk about these super tasters because people get a different number of taste buds from bare minimum up to coming out the wazoo, and that makes a difference to you. I've never been tested. I've got no idea whether I'm, and I don't see myself as having any special palate. I think I certainly know people with better palates than I've got. I think how I've made it work is because I think I can write better than some people, but they can taste better than me, if you know what I mean. You go with what works, I guess. It always used to amaze me when we first started doing these videos and things, 20 years ago, and people would sort of refer to me as an expert, and I'd think, oh, if only you know, if only you had a clue. I haven't got the slight. I've only just started doing this stuff. I got no idea, but not that I said it at the time, of course. But I always felt like, I mean, when you start judging, and it's less so now, they've moderated a bit now, but in the old days, you could quite often get 200 wines in a day lined up, and by God, your eyes would be swimming by the end of it. I mean, you spit. It's not as though you're swallowing them all, but it's still. I thought about it. It occurred to me one day, this is like cricket training. If you're going to play an innings out in the middle for a long period of time, you've got to practice in the nets to be able to play for a long period of time. And it's the same with tasting. You've got to train to be able to taste 30, 40, 50 wines or whatever it is in a bracket. And I think it's your brain gets tired, it gets the fatigue, rather than the palate. I think the palate can work if you get your brain going. And it does take time.
Sorry, just a question there. How do you refresh your palate in a 200 tasting?
No one's looking. I'll go and have a beer. But put it this way, Cooper's ales, they sell more to winemakers and wine judges and wine competitions than you could possibly imagine. People guzzle that stuff. Oh, yeah, got you. Particularly at the end of the day and that. But people talk about apples, biscuits, bread. Apples are good because it cleans your palate, and it also exposes things. Because if you're judging, if you have cheese with wine, the whatever's in cheese tends to mask faults.
So the fatty composites would mark. Yeah,
I think that's it. Whereas in an apple, it cuts through and cleans, and any faults are accentuated. So you're better off if you're going buying. Don't eat cheese at the winery or anywhere else, because if they've got a dud wine and you're scoffing cheese, it's going to seem like a good wine, or it's going to seem better than it is. If you try apples, you'll see what it's really like, and you'll be able to make a much smarter decision on whether to buy it or not.
Have you ever tried that with cigars, apple and cigars?
Never thought of it. No.
Well, there's something, guys, to try. Everyone's got an apple at home, give it a crack and see how that works.
Yeah, there's no reason why it.
I'm going to try that.
Yeah, but I mean, when we do the cigars, for example, all the videos we've done, it's sort of not really doing I'm just going to close this thing because I can feel drops of 2 seconds.
Pause this. So that's certainly something I'll try when I'm doing a tasting of cigars. Is bringing apples into the mix and see whether that cleans your palate. It's very interesting. You've always gravitated. You love your double Coronas. I see you're doing a Lucy now.
No,
not Lucy.
No, SLRDC.
That's an SLRDC. Your favourite cigar. Your favourite cigar.
Well, Lucy, I love Lucy's. I love the stuff that Hamlet did for us. Good Cohibas, Partagas D4s, Monty 2s, all the classics.
SLRDCs. I introduced you to SLRDCs because I couldn't get rid of them. I remember that story. And I think you bought your. I was selling them for $20 or $25. I can't remember how much.
It was you. One of the things that I think got you going and got me interested and got quite a lot of other people interested in Brisbane was you once a month or so you'd hold a cigar dinner, and used to do over Toowong quite regularly. I used to drive up from the coast. I was living at the coast at the time, drive up for them.
Mercury Restaurant at Toowong.
That's it. And I can remember one night you were late, and we're all there going, well, because we didn't know what cigars were going to be on. That was always a surprise. And we're going, Cohiba, you know, great Partagas. And you come in and, oh, sorry, I'm late, da, 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 da. Now, I've got for you tonight St. Louis Ray DCs. And there was just universal silence. And it was almost, everyone's looking around going, we've been sitting here for how long? And he's come up with what? None of us had heard of him. None of us had heard. And because that was the 2002s from memory. And no bands in those days.
2001. I think they were 2001s. I remember I had so many. Maybe I think because St. Louis Rays weren't made every year back then.
No. But the first ones that were made, I might be wrong. This is off the top of my head. I thought the first ones that were made was very small production of 01s, and then the 02s, which are quite famous.
Yeah, maybe in box. Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, and I can still remember, I had an ash like that on this thing. It was extraordinary. And I'm just smoking. We're all chatting away, but as I smoke this thing, I'm just thinking, how good is this cigar? And most of the other people are all just yakking away, not having fun, enjoying themselves. And I'm just thinking, and I went up and I said, okay. He said, oh, they're normally 40. I'm selling them for 20 tonight. And I think whatever I had.
That's $20 Australian, folks, which would have been about 14 US at the time. Yeah.
And so I just, and I think you said they've got to be cash on the night. And I think I had something like $65 in my pocket. So I handed over 60, grabbed 3, and I rang you the next morning and said, you got any left? And he said, yeah, hardly sold anything. And I said, okay, can I do it? I could do it on card over the phone first thing the next morning. And I bought pretty much everything you had. It wasn't that much that you had left, but
his card bounced, people. His card bounced twice. But anyway, keep going. That's fine.
Yes, apparently, if you've got a dodgy retailer, they don't like putting it through.
I love cash. I love cash so much.
So anyway,
it's good.
Unfortunately, I may have one left. I may have one of those 01s or 02s, whichever they were, left. It was either started in 2000 first, and then they were the 01s, or started in 01s and they were the 2000s, whichever it was. But they were the legendary ones, and that was, if you tell people you got if you tell people you got in and bought lots of those, they think you're a genius.
I think they go for close to $5,000 US a cap these days. I'm talking about that 2001, 2003 batches. They're really, really sought after, and for a reason. I still think they're some of the great cigars of the world. Those SLRDs.
Well, I haven't got any of those left, or hardly any. I just loved them. I smoked whatever I could.
Now a lot of people. I mean, being in the wine game, when I say the wine game, being the wine reviewing game, a lot of people would. A lot of your contemporaries, knowing that you smoke cigars, would wonder how the two can combine. But you've introduced me to winemakers, you've introduced me to champagne makers who actually love a cigar. And I always remember that lovely
Didier Mariotti, who was
D4s. He smokes his D4.
He smokes most of them. They're French. They smoke cigarettes like it's going out of fashion. Didier, he's Corsican originally, so that's even worse. I mean, they're born with a cigarette in their hand, I think. Didier was making Mum, and now he's the chief winemaker at Veuve Clicquot, and normally comes out once a year, and we try and catch up when we can. Problem is, he's always surrounded by serious people. Oh, you can't stop and have a cigar. You can't do that. There's more. You've got champagnes, etc. But yeah, they do. They love it. And I don't think to me, a lot of people just look and think, okay, it's not a real job. Hedonistic, decadent, and so are cigars. So they all just lump them together. I just think they're not surprised.
In terms of wines and spirits, fortifieds, which is a wine. But spirit, what are your favorite combinations with a cigar?
Look, I think champagne works brilliantly well. You and I have had the discussion a million times about. I know you thoroughly love red wine. I think most red wine and cigar matches are train wrecks because you just get that sort of dry tannin. It just accentuates the.
I don't go for tannic red wines when I smoke cigars. That I do not do.
I know, but
Still.
I know, yeah, but certainly good fortified ports, muskets, that sort of stuff. Good rums, good whiskies.
You into bourbons?
Yeah, I had quite a few until I got cleaned out a couple of years ago by those scumbag thieves. So I had quite a few bourbons. I've still got a few now. Not anywhere near as many as I used to have.
Yeah. It's something I still coming to terms with bourbon. I still prefer a great rum than a great bourbon when it comes to cigars. I don't know why. But I've been introduced into Armagnacs. I've been introduced into cognacs, and I'm starting to enjoy those as well with cigars.
I think there's that sweetness you get, a core of sweetness you can get in bourbons. I think tends to work very well with cigars, and you see that with the rums as well. Even though they might not be overly sweet or anything, and it's all well balanced, but you see that. So I can understand that. Armagnacs and cognacs probably a drier sort of style.
Yeah,
but then there's enough variation in cigars that you can find something for each. White wines work surprisingly well.
Yeah. I've especially through summer. I was finding some fantastic combination. Gewurz. I love a great Gewurz with cigars. I think it's one of the great combinations. And the problem is it's got such a high sugar content. It's not great for the waistline or the fitness. But either way, a little bit of
There's plenty of dry Gewurz out there, good dry Gewurz. And the problem's not so much the sugar, it's the alcohol, which is not good for the waistline.
True.
So it's you're shot either from the front or the back. Either way, you're going to get it.
Listen, we've gone through this remarkable price increase in the Cuban cigar world specifically. Do you see any parallels there with the wine world in terms of pricing, or what's gone through the roof?
Burgundy and champagne in recent years. For many years, we used to say the only two wines that are still great value are champagne and ports, because they hadn't had these massive hikes. But even Burgundy, I can remember probably 15 years ago when it was, a mate had his old. It was actually the guy I bought the Romani Conti for. Had his first grandkid ages ago, and so we were having a lunch, and someone brought along a bottle of Denny Morte Chambertin. I think it was the 96, and it blew me away. It was just gorgeous, and so it should be. But and I remember looking at one of the auction houses, and there was a magnum of the same wine coming up for auction, and it was the magnum of this was cheaper than single bottles of first growths at the time, and I knew which I'd prefer. I mean, as good as those wines are, I knew which I preferred, and we just used to laugh at the prices of Bordeaux. Well, now, God help us, an average bottle of Chambertin's is top stuff. So when you go lower, they're still more expensive than bottles of first growths these days. They've gone through the roof. Burgundy, champagne has now followed. There's still wines that aren't anywhere near as expensive as they probably could or should be, but the good stuff is you're paying. And when you say, well, it's just as valid, just as good a wine as a great Burgundy, as a great Bordeaux, as a great Grange or whatever, why shouldn't it be the same price? And now we're seeing it starting to happen with vintage ports as well. But that's just, we're starting to get to the end of it almost. There's not too many categories left where they haven't. But cigars are just ridiculous.
In terms of champagne, which I think is one of the great combinations with cigars. And for guys out there, and girls out there who are listening to this, at the bottom end of the scale of champagne, what are some standouts for you?
Oh, look, the large houses with their non-vintages, things like Moet, Mumm, Verve. Yeah, you can certainly get cheaper wines, cheaper champagnes, but they're relatively cheap in comparison. And these days they make them. If anyone has sort of thought, oh, Moet, no way in the world, I'm not going near that, based on what they knew 10, 12, 15 years ago, forget it. The difference, and it wasn't, they didn't change overnight. The guy who's been doing it now for a long time, Benoit Gouez, I hope I've got that right pronunciation. He's a very smart man and a very good winemaker, and he did it gradually. And that's what they've got to do. They've got to do it gradually, because if someone goes in and says, I want a bottle of Moet, and goes home, oh, this isn't what I had yesterday, it all goes out the window. They just got to do it so it's such a gradual thing. And he's been doing this now for years, just tinkering with little lowering the dosage a little bit, improving the quality. And when you think of the production, the massive amount, I mean, it's supposed to be one bottle opened every 2 seconds in the world. That's an incredible amount of wine. To be able to do it for that quantity of wine it's just extraordinary. So those are the ones I'd be getting a bottle of Pol, non-vintage Pol. Bollinger's a bit more expensive, but Bolly's a good cigar match, because it's a bit richer and more powerful.
I love Taittinger. I love just basic Taittinger. It works so well.
It does, but it tends to be very much at the lighter, more elegant end of the spectrum, and so you could probably get better matches. But it's such a good champagne. And look, I used to get this much more with what do you eat with what do you drink with what do you eat, and I used to just think, listen, unless it's something ridiculous like Sauternes and steak, if there's something you like to eat and something you like to drink, just do. I mean, really, it's not the end of the world, and it may not be, the second coming as far as a match, but if you enjoy them both, you're gonna enjoy yourself, and that's pretty much the same, except some of those tannic red wines. Pretty much the same for me with what you drink with a cigar. If you like Taittinger and you like your cigar, you're 99% there.
Yeah, look, it's basically my go-to is a Taittinger and Pol NV when it comes to cigars. That's beautifully done, Kenny. Beautifully done. Ash everywhere. Nice work.
Fertilizer. I believe we call it fertilizer.
Very good. Travel. You're a massive lover of travel. If you give us 3 spots in the world that you'd recommend for people to go, what would they be?
Oh, depends on on the reason you want to go. I mean, obviously, we've had so much fun in Cuba. I think I've been about 10, 12 times over the 20 odd years. But
That's better.
I can.
That's the same number of girlfriends you've had over there, 10 or 12.
One a trip.
Over there.
One a trip seems fair. I'm making that up, of course. Absolutely not. There were 1 or 2 that lasted a couple of trips, but we move on. Can we edit this? Can we stop? Now, look. So that's great. I mean, obviously, I've had a wonderful time with going to a lot of wine regions around the place. The fishing as well. I mean, not that we caught a fish, but I loved Costa Rica and I want to go back. The rivers in New Zealand for big brown trout, sight fishing for them that is an experience that is just, well, take me now, Lord. That sort of stuff. I suppose, look, as I mentioned the gorillas before, that was something, when I saw that David Attenborough show where he sat amongst those gorillas, and I said to my parents, I'm going to do that. And I was a school kid. And they looked at me and said, basically, you're a complete idiot. And I said, no, I'm going to do that. And I did. It took a while, but I did. And that was one of the most extraordinary days to go and sit amongst these gorillas. And I was lucky when I did it because it wasn't. I mean, it was 6 or 7 years after Diane Fossey was killed. Now, at the time, that seemed like an eternity. Now it's a blink, and now it's so much more regulated. Back then, we went in and you go. They have a couple of guards go with you, of course. It was a $40 fee for you go in overnight. You stay in a hut, and then you go out and see the gorillas the next morning and come back the following afternoon. That was a $40 fee. Now it's about $1,500 or $2,000 or $4,000 or whatever it is. Just and so why not? I mean, people are lining up to do it. But now you only go in and you're only allowed to be, not that close to them for about 30 minutes, and then you're out of there. When we did it, we spent 3 or 4 hours around, and literally one came over and sort of did the exploring. It was just the most extraordinary thing that. So that was, I definitely, even with the cost, climbing Kilimanjaro is another one that is definitely, if you can walk, go and do it. That's a wonderful thing to do.
You get to the top.
Yep.
You get to the top of Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, it's a 5-day trip, and but it's. I mean, there's. When I was at uni, we used to do some technical climbing. I was horrible. I was hopeless at it. There's no strictly technical climbing in this. It's just you just keep going up, 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 up. The interesting thing was on the way down, this storm came through that was the most unbelievably torrential storm, because where you walk quite often digs out a thing. They don't think about going like that for erosion. No, they just go straight down. So of course the water then goes and digs it out. So quite often you're walking in a track where the sides of the track are above your head, and down came this water, and we were hanging onto tree stumps not to be swept off the mountain, which sounds, if you drowned at 15,000 foot on a mountain, it'd just be a bit silly, really, on the tombstone. But it was an extraordinary thing to do. I definitely recommend that. God, what else? Jesus. Well, just driving across the Sahara, if you can do that. Although these days you'd probably get killed. Driving around the States, that was, we spent, a couple of mates and I, although I spent 1 month of that in hospitals with a burst appendix and peritonitis and gangrene. So,
can't kill him with a stick, people. Can't kill him with a stick. That's it. Very good.
So that's, look, all of that sort of stuff. I've been very lucky with all the travelling I've got to do, just whether it's off my own bat, with friends, through wines or fishing or whatever.
That's cool. Very good. I was going to ask, to relax, what do you do? I mean, how do you relax, Kenny Gargett? Not that you're overly stressed most of the time, but how do you relax?
I do get stressed. Okay. Look, I'd love to do more fishing. I don't do anywhere near enough of that. Read a lot of books, but I don't sort of sit down in the middle of the day and pick up a book and just read it. I mean, I'll do that. Well, very rarely do I do that. I might if I'm down the coast. If I'm down the coast, when I go down, because I take myself away to work for a week just to try and catch up on stuff, and I'll normally give myself one afternoon where I'll go and sit down outside with a cigar, gin or rum or whatever, and a good book for 4 or 5 hours. But that's only a few times a year. Well, you and I talk a lot about sport. Enjoy watching sports. What else? Well,
the good, the basics.
Catching up with friends. Yeah. But I mean, I live by myself, and I don't have the kids and things, so I don't have that structure that you have to be available to take kids to sport on a weekend or whatever. And also because of what I do, I don't have the 9-to-5 job.
Kenny's never married, just so you know. He's been a bachelor all his life. That's why he's so happy.
Well, one of my best mates rang up a decade or so ago, and he said, "It's time you got married." Oh, I said, "Why?" And he said, "Why the hell should you be the only one of us happy?" And I thought,
But now you are known for a great rant. God knows you've ranted enough on FOH over the years. What are the things that really piss you off?
Oh, look, I'm ranting less these days, I think. You just get, certainly one of them we can't discuss, or it'll be back to 6 months again. But I used to rant a fair bit about rugby, but rugby, tragically, I mean, you're talking to someone who, at the beginning of the year, the most important date in the calendar, Queensland, New South Wales rugby game. Now, I'd have had exams or funerals or whatever on the same day. They were taking second place. This year, I forgot the game was even on. And I mean, I used to drive down to Sydney to watch them, and I never missed one up here. Rugby has killed itself as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I haven't watched a game live now for several years. And if you'd said that to me 10 years ago.
You were very passionate. You are very passionate about rugby still. It just, unfortunately, it's so bad in the country that it's not worthwhile following. Well, anyway, most of our guys don't care about rugby, and that's fine.
No.
But we suffer greatly when it comes to rugby. In terms of, and you've always struggled with technology. We've always realised that. I mean, I've told the guys I gave him his first smartphone because he turned up on the deck one day.
Yeah.
I did. I give you. It was a Samsung.
Yeah, that's right. I've got
smartphone.
that.
You came up on the deck with your Nokia. You had a Nokia that had a key.
Yeah.
In the. And I asked you.
It had a little rubber thing that you had to press into, and I'd worn it out.
That's called the on button, mate. That's called the on button. Yeah.
Well, it was a little rubber thing at the top, and it had worn out.
He couldn't get the rubber had worn out.
I had to use a knife
to turn his phone on, and he turned up one day with a key that was stuck in his phone because he tried to turn his phone on with the key and it just got stuck.
The Tony Gregg of technology. John will understand that.
Yeah. So and I said that I was so appalled. I said, I'm sure we got a spare phone here somewhere, and I gave you your first smartphone, and which is, I always remember because you asked me, well, how do I get my contacts across? How do I get more of the people I call across to this new smartphone? And I said, well, it's pretty easy to do. I said, I'll just move your contacts across. And you gave me your phone, and you said, how do you do this? How do you do your contacts across? I said, well, I go to your contacts. I went to your contacts in your phone, and you had none in there.
No.
And I said, how do you call people, King? How do you call people? He goes, well, I go to the text messages, and I scroll through all the text messages until I get to the person, and if I press it twice, it rings him.
or where someone's rung me, and it's just in there, and then I just hit reply, and that system worked perfectly well.
Yeah, it was good. And you know what? I should have learned from that. I should have learned that when it comes to technology, you're just not there. It's just an impossibility. But then I did this. We started this business called Spit Bucket, Ken and I, which is wine reviews, and of course that required some sort of, how would you call it, technical competence. Well, that business lasted. I don't mention the other partners. We're good on that, but that was a great concept, and I learnt so much from that. I learnt never to go into business with Ken again. Never, ever, ever to go into business with you again. But it was a great. You didn't save that. You didn't save that at all.
That's a discussion for off air. I saved that business. Only for a while, but I saved it for a while.
Never. Yeah. So when it comes to technology, you've always been challenged, and that's never going to change.
I remember when they went to digital cameras, and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I have a perfectly good camera with film. I'm not budging. I wasn't. I'm sure I wasn't the last person to go digital, but eventually, oh well. And I just thought, I'm just an idiot. I'm just such an idiot. This is just leaves film for dead. But I was determined not to.
Technology. There was another case where he bought himself a beautiful Macintosh laptop.
We're about to end this. Sorry. Let's get back to me saving that business.
A Macintosh laptop.
Don't you start.
brand
seriously, this
new,
is, if
brand
anyone's
new,
listening, they can hear the sound of thin ice cracking.
that he couldn't use, that we had to lose somewhere in South America on purpose. But anyway, that's a story for another day.
What? Yeah, that was nothing to do with me. That was nothing. The technical whiz kids took it upon themselves, and suddenly I don't have even a dud computer.
I had to rustle up a letter. I had to rustle up a letter from the police station that it was stolen. And you think I'd get any thanks for that, people? Do you think I'd get any
You
thanks
stole
for
the
that?
computer and you wanted thanks.
No. I had to get the letter saying that it was stolen, and so we could make a claim back here. So I get the letter in Chile, and and I gave it to Ken. And do you think I got any thanks for that? No. You know what I got? I got an absolute mouthful, an earful from Ken because the letter was in Spanish. What else would I say? What's the
Australian.
local What's the local police people in Chile? What are they going to write you a letter in English? No. Anyway, it all worked out well. It all worked out well. It's like the day
And
I
listen,
gave him.
excuse me.
I gave him a
Something about
humidor.
something about the armpit calling the arsehole hairy.
I gave him this beautiful humidor because he needed a new humidor. It was a commercial humidor, glass humidor, and he topped up the water so much. His humidifier so much that it spread onto his Cohiba double Coronas and shit like that. Some beautiful cigars that were completely ruined, or ish. And he gets home on one of his trips and absolutely balls me out that I've sold him a dud humidor. A dud.
Well, you didn't
humidor.
sell it; you gave it to me, because it was a heap of crap. If you remember, in sort of the general store next to the cigarettes, there'd be this horrible plastic thing with doors that didn't match, etc., and a few boxes inside this clear plastic horror thing. That was what he gave me, and the thing broke and water snuck up through the bottom into the bottom boxes of the cigars, which happened to be where I'd put the good stuff. And the trouble I had with the insurance company, it ended up being more fun than I have had for a long. It took me a year of fighting, but we got there in the end, and it was paid.
I helped you. I gave you a full
Did?
valuation of the stock. I gave it to you.
Well, only because you thought they were going to pay you. They thought they were going to pay me. Straight to you.
They
I stopped that
to replace the stock, but no, you pocketed the stock as you. Yeah, it was.
I was entitled to do, because I couldn't get the same stock for the same price anymore. Oh dear, the troubles I've had, unbelievable. And also, I mean, sorry, pot kettle, Mister. I mean, if anyone had any idea of the disasters we had on the deck for all those years we were filming, the number of times he'd be trying to, I'll have to ring Ben. I don't know how this works. And I'd look around and he would have piled up 3 or 4 pot plants and put the camera on top of that to try and get it to work. And then we had the priceless day where I can't find the remote. Where's the remote? What have you done with the remote? And I haven't touched it, of course. Where's my remote? The remote is sitting in a bucket of water where he dropped it.
That's because you had 200 buckets of water on that thing, right? 200 buckets of water on that deck. I don't know why.
I'm conscious. I'll tell you what, and I have told you this. The old deck used to have this thing in a corner halfway along where the water would shoot off and hit the edge. So I would put containers there that'd fill up whenever it rained, and I didn't have any other thing to water all the plants on the deck. I had a whole heap of plants up and down the deck. So I'd just use these buckets to environmentally conscious. I mean, seriously.
We live in a subtropical state. There's no problems with it. But that's all right.
Well, there have been times. Yeah, but I'm not going to go and stand out and hold the thing over when it's raining, am I? What do you expect? I've got a roof. The plants were under the roof. What do you expect?
Let's put it this way. He had a possum living on his deck, and one day the possum moved out into the trees because it was far more civilized than living on the deck. It was
3 nights later. Let me tell you, if you have ever heard the screams of a possum when a carpet snake takes it, yeah, it wished it was back on the deck. I can tell you that. I mean, these screams will stay with you.
It wanted to take its chances, Ken. Take its chances in the world.
Well, that was the end of that possum.
All right, Kenny. I think that gives everyone a relative insight into your world.
I'm just getting going.
We'll do a part 2. No, we won't. No, we won't. Kenny, thank you very much for the deep dive and your insights.
My pleasure.
Into wine and cigars. The guys, if they have any questions of wine and cigars, you can certainly PM Ken directly. He won't answer, more than likely.
No.
He
Listen,
always
for
answers.
the two blokes whose life is so deficient that you're still watching this, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Until next week. Hasta luego. Cheers.
Oh, dear.